Thinking of investing, working, or starting a business in the cannabis industry? We've got you covered right here on Plant Problems. Hosted by Tony Frischknecht, Plant Problems takes a different approach to cannabis than what you're seeing and hearing from the mainstream media. Come along with Tony and be in the know about how to invest, work, or start a cannabis business. Let's get the show started with your host, Tony Frischknecht.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Plant Problems. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, in our lives, I find that it's tough to know what's happening behind the curtain. And many of us are always wondering, well, I wonder how they really do it. So my next guest I'm going to bring on today has the insight of being behind the curtain. He was nominated by President Barack Obama to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Kansas and was unanimously confirmed by the Senate in August 2010. And he served in this position until April 2016. I want to welcome Barry Grissom to Plant Problems. Hey, Barry, how are you doing today?
Hey, Tony, it's great to be with you guys.
Hey, thanks so much for being on. And this is a big deal for me because you're my first, I would say, political interview that I've had. So this is kind of fun here. I'm hoping everybody else is excited as much as I am. So Barry, you've had quite the career. Like I mentioned before, I started when we were talking. I started going through all the different things that you've done over the years, and it's very impressive.
Well, thank you. It's been an interesting ride so far, and it's far from over. So there's still lots of challenges and fun things ahead, I think.
Absolutely. You know, you fall into an interesting time being a U.S. attorney in the beginning stages of legalization in America.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you know, I also know you have some other interests with, helping people less fortunate, like the human trafficking, fair labor. So, understanding all these dynamics that are happening in the cannabis world right now, especially when it comes to social equity that's happening. I mean, these are all little pieces fighting for the little guy, right?
Absolutely. I mean, all we got to do, here we are, coming up on the end of July, and we've seen all of the unrest and I'll say the awakening that's taken place surrounding criminal justice reform. In a big piece of that, I think, is what I refer to as the silliness of cannabis prohibition. It is a waste on so many levels. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. It's a waste of law enforcement resources, but most importantly, it's a waste of human capital. Incarcerating our fellow citizens for engaging in conduct that should otherwise be legal, just like alcohol, to me just doesn't make good public policy.
Yeah, there's been, over the last 6 months, there's been several communities I've seen, especially out of California,
mm-hmm.
where they're expunging records, which is amazing. We've been looking for something like this for a while. What do you think is sparking that right now?
Well, I think it's a number of things. One, I'm in addition to other things you mentioned, I'm also general counsel for a company called Electrum Partners, and we work with folks in the cannabis universe and kind of give them a direction on how they can be successful in whatever endeavor they're involved in that universe. When I first became aware of what I might be able to bring to the debate, to the discussion, that was about 6 weeks before I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I was in D.C., and I went down on K Street, where all the lobbyists live, and I went to the headquarters of Normal. And I walked in, and I said, "My name is Barry Grissom. I'm the United States Attorney for the District of Kansas. I'm here to help you. What can I do? I'm going to be leaving in 6 weeks. And after they kind of peeled themselves off the wall, because I was looking every bit the part of the Fed, my dark suit, red tie and white shirt with my little brass lapel button that said Department of Justice, I met Keith Stropp, who started Normal back in 1970, I believe. In fact, I think it's their 50th anniversary this year. And Keith said, well, we're going to have a conference in Aspen. We have it every year. And people get their continuing legal education credits there, as well as other items. But when I went into that conference, and kind of the way you started off your interview today, I was the very first former federal prosecutor to speak to a group like Normal. And I have to admit, I had certain preconceived notions about who might be attending that. And the thing that surprised me in a very positive way was the number of people who were looking at it from not only a business perspective. There were venture capitalists there, to be sure, but also from a social justice perspective. And I think the past, certainly in the past 3 years, 3.5, now almost 4 years, I think there's been a raised consciousness about what is social justice and how we can attain that. And as I said a few moments ago, and you alluded to, I think issues surrounding cannabis prohibition is a part of that effort that we can make and that we can change, so that we don't do things that, from my perspective, are really bad public policy for all communities, not just communities of color or underprivileged folks, but for all of us. I think we will be a much better society if we can admit that this is something that people want to use, that this is something that does not, the classic line is, it's a gateway drug. Well, that's as foolish as saying beer is a gateway drug to alcoholism. We don't penalize people for owning beer or possessing beer or having beer in their home, or so we need to have a discussion that's data driven. And I think that's also another part of this is the discussion now is not, it's not red state, blue state kinds of stuff. It's really about libertarian. It's about, what should I be allowed to do as an adult if I'm responsible in my own home with my friends? And I think that kind of what I was called an adult approach has really awakened a lot of people. And I think we're starting to see that on the federal as well as the state level. I mean, majority of states now have some level of acceptance, whether it's recreation or medical use. But we see lots of legislation. I know Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, has a great piece of legislation. He just says, take it off of being a Schedule I drug. As probably most of your listeners know, there is a Federal Controlled Substance Act, and they have different schedules for different kinds of drugs. And Schedule I is heroin and marijuana. Yeah. Now, you got to remember when that was done. That was done by Richard Nixon in 1970, and it was done, if you read John Ehrlichman's book, they did it for the sole purpose of going after communities of color, going after what they saw were anti-war folks, and that's the only reason why it's there.
Do you think that that's why it's not legalized yet, because they're still trying to get through this old bureaucracy that has been on the books for so long?
I can't remember which Supreme Court justice said that the states are the laboratories of democracy, and what we see, where we see the changes happening, have been at the state level primarily. And I think it's really important to also realize that until just very recently, in the past year or so, past 2 years, if it was legalized, it was done through referenda. I mean, the people are way ahead of the politicians on this. And I think now politicians are catching up. When you look back in 1970, when 13% of the people, according to Gallup, thought it should be legalized, compared to now, which is almost 70%, and it's across the board, Republicans, Democrats, independents. It's something that I think if you are a politician and you maintain the status quo, you do that at your peril. I think now is the time to make that change, and I think we're starting to see that in more and more laws and legislation is being passed at the state and the federal level.
Yeah, there was a a huge memo that was actually put out by Eric Holder.
It's called the Cole Memo.
Yeah. Correct.
And I was at the department at that time, and we had a discussion about, what were we going to do with all of these different states that were on track through referenda to legalize cannabis use, particularly Colorado. At that time, the U.S. Attorney in Colorado, a great guy, John Walsh, said, we need to address this, because if we don't, then we're going to be forced under preemption to go into a state and basically take a right away from the citizens of that state who overwhelmingly said, we want this. So there was a group formed at DOJ, a working group, and they drafted up what eventually became known as the Cole Memo. Jim Cole was the Deputy Attorney General under Eric at that time, and anytime there's a change, the DAG, as he's referred to, or she's referred to, signs off on it. So Jim signed off on the infamous Cole Memo, and I think the brilliance of it, it's very straightforward, it's very common sense. It basically says, if a state chooses to have some form of use, whether it be recreational, whether it be medical, if there is a system in place, much like if you're trying to get a liquor license, that says you can't engage in criminal activity, you can't sell to children, minors, you can't use this money or have other people involved in the process who are involved in the criminal enterprises. Again, like the same questions you would have to answer if you're getting a liquor license in the state. And the Cole Memo said, if you do those things, we will not preempt.
Yeah, that created the stability that was so much lacking in the industry at that time. Absolutely.
And of course, our big fear was when Mr. Trump won the presidency, and we found out that Senator Jeff Sessions was going to be the Attorney General of the United States. We were buckling up for a very bumpy ride, but surprisingly, Sessions basically said, I'm going to defer to each U.S. attorney. And there's 93 U.S. attorneys because there's 93 federal judicial districts. We have to have one in each district. So he said, I'm just going to defer to whatever that U.S. attorney wants. And you were just talking about stability. So now we don't have stability. Now we have 93 interpretations. Luckily and fortunately, I think, for the most part, people have kind of taken a step back and let what was already in place continue to go forward. I know that's Colorado, the 4 districts in California, other states that have provided for recreation or medical use. Nobody's really run out, to the best of my knowledge, in this administration and shut down a bunch of dispensaries, which is great.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one thing that we were talking about in our association groups. These were our marching orders. We followed this, and we kept everything on the up and up, and that allowed us to do business, gave us that stability, and it was the first time that the feds really acknowledged us as something of what a business should look like, right?
Well, you take it as an example, and I haven't seen the numbers recently, but when you go back and you look at 2017, of course, 3 years ago, but 2017, total cannabis-related sales in the state of Colorado was $1.5 billion. Now, what that tells me as a former federal prosecutor is $1.5 billion didn't go to bad guys, didn't go to cartels. It went to entrepreneurs who created over 20,000 new full-time jobs that paid a living wage and provided a new tax revenue source for the state. I see that as a win-win proposition. But just the idea that we have now taken that element out of the cartel's portfolio is a huge win for law enforcement.
Absolutely. I mean, I know there's still a fair amount of black market happening across the state, but not to the scale it was, not even close.
Oh yeah, and you know, we still have people up in the hills who are making liquor illegally.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're always going to have that. That's not going to go away. But I think as the industry matures, and I think you'll agree with me from your experience, it's come a long way in a very short period of time from a business maturity perspective. But as it continues to mature, it'll be treated like a Coors Beer Company or Budweiser. As we're seeing in Canada right now, and what they've done in Canada, and the amount of American money, I believe from Coca-Cola, Philip Morris, folks like that they've invested in that market, kind of sitting on the sidelines, if you will. Some folks say like vultures, I won't go that far, but sitting on the sidelines, waiting to kind of swoop in to the American market once it's off that Schedule 1. Because the Schedule 1, I'm sure your listeners know, aside from the criminal aspects of it, it prohibits you from banking.
Yeah.
So if you're in Colorado and you have a dispensary or another state where recreational use is provided for, and you're operating on a cash basis, that in and of itself makes you a target for criminal activity. Why rob a liquor store that has, a couple $1,000 when you can knock over a dispensary that has tens of thousands of dollars on any given day? As a friend of mine in Colorado said, the fastest growing business in Colorado isn't the cannabis business, it's the security business. Police officers leaving after they've been on the force for 5, 10, 15 years, taking all that institutional knowledge, where now they have a 9-to-5 job. They're not breaking up domestic violence. They're not walking into places. It's a completely different dynamic. But we need to have the change in the banking laws so that banks can lend capital, people can deposit their money, and like any other business. Because again, as your listeners know, if you own a dispensary, because it's still an illegal drug under the Controlled Substances Act, you can't write any of that off from a tax standpoint.
It still boggles my mind to this day.
Yeah.
It's been, since 2012 in state, it's been legal here. And even I tell some of my friends now, I'm like, well, they still can't write off normal expenses. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? And I explain it to them, and they why can't they do that? I said, because it's federally illegal. I could go into that. That's a long conversation. I mean, bankruptcy, all that stuff. But I did have one question for you that I don't want to forget about asking. How was it to work with Eric Holder?
He's well. Let's see. If you can probably see us, but there he is.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In the picture over my shoulder. Now he is a fantastic guy. He's a great leader. I think his time at the Justice Department will be looked back on and thought of almost in the same way that we think about Robert Kennedy's time at the Justice Department. He implemented what is known as smart on crime, the way to approach prosecution, where before Attorney General Holder took the position, if you were a line prosecutor, what you were ordered, in effect, mandated to do was you charged the highest, most provable offense you could.
Yeah.
So that meant if you had a conspiracy theory and you're going after Mr. Big over here who's getting really, really rich, but there's some kid in Lawrence, Kansas, the University of Kansas, and he's selling 2 pounds of cannabis that came originally from that chain of folks from Mr. Big. That kid in Lawrence, Kansas gets to do 10 years just like Mr. Big. He gets held accountable for all. And that kind of approach to prosecution, Holder said, let's be more circumspect. Let's look and say, what's the more appropriate way to go after the kid in Lawrence, Kansas versus Mr. Big? Mr. Big may need to go away. Kid in Lawrence, Kansas might just need to be referred to state prosecution or charged with a lesser offense of some type. If he truly has a drug dependency problem, maybe we need to get him into treatment. So we had all these options, and that was something that A.G. Holder pushed hard for. Under A.G. Holder, they rebuilt the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which I think is the gold standard of DOJ, after it was gutted by the Bush administration. Sadly, it's been gutted again, and hopefully we'll be able to rebuild it during the next administration. But no, Attorney General Holder was and is an amazing guy. Right now he is involved with President Obama with a group that is trying to help Democrats win legislative seats at the state level, because in 2021 we're going to have redistricting.
Okay, okay.
And one of the major reasons why the Republicans were so successful was that in the last time they gerrymandered the heck out of a lot of state seats to where more Democrats would vote in the statewide election, but when you saw how they had them cut up, more Republicans won.
Yeah.
So he's really been involved in pushing back on issues surrounding voter suppression and gerrymandering.
Well, just to go back just a few steps, you know, when you're as a prosecutor going for the highest level of prosecution, can you explain to me a little bit more in depth on how that is when you go to charge somebody that's maybe moving 1,000 pounds or 100 pounds? Because it's a layer, right? As you go, you basically build all the way up. From my experience, I've seen some of this.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things you do if your goal is to, let's talk about methamphetamine or heroin, and I think we can agree that, you know, those are substantially different substances as compared to cannabis. If you want to go after whoever is manufacturing, creating, distributing something like methamphetamine, and you have somebody who is, I'll just say, use a common phrase, he's a street dealer, well, you might go in and put pressure on that person through a charge in hopes that that person, to save himself or herself and to get that charge maybe reduced, or a recommendation that under the sentencing guidelines that because of their assisting in the case, assisting in the prosecution, finding someone else to prosecute who's further up the chain, they get a consideration. So oftentimes that's how it works. You know, one of the challenges, going back to Attorney General Holder and the Smart on Crime Initiative, one of the challenges is, you know, if you had been a line prosecutor, let's say for 5-10 years in an office like in Kansas or Missouri or any other state, and you'd always been told this is the right way to do it, and now someone comes along and says, you know, we're going to change this. The pushback that was there, and I think because, quite frankly, there's some rollout problems with that, is, you know, for those folks who've been doing what they thought was the right way all that time, now they're saying, oh, so you're telling me I did it the wrong way. You're saying, no, it's just a different policy. But when you, as you can imagine, getting folks to change that kind of mindset, it's like, as they say, it's like turning a battleship. It's an institutional change. And it just takes a long time for that to sink in and people start doing it the way that Eric wanted to. Of course, the day after Mr. Sessions became the Attorney General, if you went to the DOJ website, the Smart on Crime Initiative was gone.
Yeah.
They went right back to, charging the highest, most provable offense.
And then we're also seeing states that are, releasing prisoners and expunging records, and these are massive things that you just can't hit a switch and turn it back around and stop the ship, right?
Absolutely, and when you go back, I used to tell people when they find out you work for the federal government, they just think it's an unlimited amount of resources out there for you to tap into. And the reality was, and we have three offices in Kansas. I had 48 lawyers and 56 support staff, and I got roughly $8.5 million. That's it. You're not going to get any more. So the question becomes, what is your priority, Mr. U.S. Attorney?
Yeah.
Are you going to go after sexual exploitation of children on the internet? Are you going to go after human trafficking? Are you going to go after people who are violating labor laws? Or are you going to spend all your money chasing guys who are down I-70 coming out of Colorado who are bringing cannabis back into Kansas? I mean, from my perspective, is when you talk about investigation, interdiction, arrest, prosecution, and incarceration, that's a lot of resources. And at the end, what do you got? You basically have someone who's now potentially in jail. They spend their time in jail. When they come out, their inability to find employment because they are now a felon, it has all these ripple effects. It affects their family. It affects their community. So I just think that
generational. It affects their generation.
Absolutely. And there's got to be a better way to address it. And as I said, I know that at one point in time, a couple of years ago, there were over 40 pieces of legislation pending on the Hill that address different aspects of cannabis, cannabis use, cannabis industry. So if a single party, from my perspective, and I'm a partisan, if the Democrats can take back the Senate and we win the White House and continue to build on what we've done in the House, I think within the first 6 months, the kind of legislation that Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey had proposed, I think it'll be signed. And I think it's going to have a profound effect on individuals who were not involved in crimes of violence. That's a separate thing. If you're drug charge and crimes of violence, you're probably not going to get expunged. But if it was simply something as trafficking, manufacturing, those kinds of things, and you can get your life set back straight because now you can remove that weight off of yourself, that conviction, now you can get that student loan, which you can't get now if you have it. Now you can go on and, you can go to college, or you can get that job. There was a move called Ban the Box, if you remember that for a while.
Yeah.
On every application had that little place you had to check. Have you ever been convicted of major felony or a misdemeanor other than traffic offenses? And if you checked it, then you were in the pile they wouldn't even look at.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of companies have gotten away from that because, quite frankly, anymore, everybody does background checks on prospective employees. So if that's the case and you've got something out there, you can sit down and they'll say, well, Barry, we saw you have a felony. And they say, yes, when I was 19, me and 3 buddies of mine stole a car and we went joyriding, and I pled out to a non-person felony, and I didn't have to do any time, but yeah, it's on my record. I'm sorry, we're not going to. So giving someone the ability to explain themselves as opposed to just arbitrarily putting them in the other pile where they'll just vanish into the ether and never get a job is, I think if we can do away with that, that in and of itself is going to help a lot of folks.
What do you think are some of the best opportunities for folks out there looking to get involved in the industry that maybe are coming from these expungements or coming from, potentially they've had problems with the war on drugs? Do you see certain avenues where you're like, that's the direction I would take, or this is the business I would start?
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see. I used the term earlier, how it is a maturing economy, and when it becomes legal, and it will, it's going to be interesting. As I said, folks, in this, I think it's going to actually displace a lot of people, because I think I think that you're going to have these large industrial, venture capitalist types coming in and, in effect, buying up markets, and making it really difficult. Now, what it might come down to is it might come down to being like a really cool boutique vineyard, that you only produce, less than 1,000 cases of Pinot.
Yeah.
Maybe you've got a certain strand that is unique. And I have friends who live up in Mendocino, California, and they're already talking about, just like appellations for wines, they're talking about appellations for cannabis plants. So it's going to take some creativity, I think, because I think once big money gets involved in the industry, I think that's going to change things. But somebody has to be employed by those folks, and I think whether you are in the agriculture side of the business, whether you're in you want to be a lobbyist for them, whether you want to get into sales, promotion, the ad world, there's all kinds of opportunities that are going to come out of, even if we become big money comes in and kind of takes it over. There's still going to be lots of money to be made, opportunities to provide jobs for people, I believe.
Yeah, it's I'm excited for a lot of people out there that still are on the beginning stages of this market, because there's a heck of a lot of opportunity available in it right now. And I know that gentlemen like yourselves are pushing forward in the market, which is exciting to me as well. What projects are you specifically working on right now that you would want to share?
Well, we're still working with Electrum Partners. We're right now, like so many other businesses. I mean, COVID has really kind of frozen people in their tracks from an investment standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
MJ Biz, which is a huge cannabis conference, they had to cancel it this past year and probably be canceled again. So right now things are kind of slow. And I think we're all just kind of taking this time, like I'm sure most of your listeners are, is spend time with their family, hug the people that you love, people you haven't talked to in a long time, pick the phone up, see how they're doing. It's given us a time to kind of reflect and kind of reset. So right now, that's what I'm doing, and I hope other folks are as well, because as they say, this too shall pass, and we will, all the various businesses hopefully will be back. Maybe not the same way as it was before, but we will be back, and I certainly think this industry will continue to grow and continue to mature, because there is a real need, a real want, a real desire for cannabis, not only for recreational purposes, but for medicinal purposes. And I think once it's taken off that Schedule 1, then we can actually start having meaningful research to find out what are some of the curative cares that cannabis, hemp have, because right now we can't do that. The only place in America, ironically enough, where they can do legal research on cannabis is at the University of Mississippi. It's the only place where they're growing it and can do research. Other than that, you have to look outside the country. Canada, Israel has been a leader in doing research into this. So, once the virus thing is hopefully at some point behind us or under control, then I think the business of cannabis will get back to where it was before the virus.
Yeah, when you're talking research, there's so many things. There's so many compounds right now in the plant that we have no clue what they'll do, and right. This blindness of not being able to do this study, has created this unknowing what's happening. Is this good for me? Is this help? Is these two parts of the plant help? Does it? It's very confusing to the consumer, because they don't get it either, right? We're just kind of opening up and saying, hey, it's got THC in it, this has CBD in it. That's really the two things that people are looking at, right? And so there's been some big wins over the last year. There was a lawsuit filed against the DEA by the doctor from Arizona. There was a couple battles where she sued the DEA in response to her application to study the plant. She won. I don't know when they're giving those out, but there's a couple universities that are actually getting this involved, which is awesome.
It's again, we go back to kind of where we were talking about earlier. I mean, it's changing of a mindset.
Yeah.
And we have to get past that 1970s mentality and say, let's put this in the hands of researchers who can do peer review research as to what the properties are, if any, that I have from a medical standpoint, all those kinds of things. And right now, while we're not seeing it across the board, like you said, there are different situations that 10 years ago we wouldn't have seen.
Yeah.
5 years ago, if you just went up to somebody and said, "Do you know what CBD is?" They couldn't tell you.
No.
The other thing is maybe another government agency like the FBI, IRS, that alphabet soup thing.
Yeah.
But now just about everybody knows and has probably close to their home there's a CBD shop down the road, that helps with this or this or this. So it's again, it's a maturing, growing industry, and I think that's just one more example of it.
Yeah, well said. I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Would you be willing to tell me one thing that you enjoyed about this interview?
Oh, well, the thing I enjoy about reaching out and talking with people about cannabis from the perspective of a former federal prosecutor. I like educating folks. It's not reefer madness as we were all led to believe for so long. And I think being able to talk to folks and to hopefully provide them an insight and an education on cannabis use, cannabis, whether it's good public policy or not. No, I thoroughly enjoy that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it today, being able to talk with you and your listeners.
Well, thanks, Barry. Me too. I know I try to provide as much as I can for the listeners on the education side for the exact reasons you just said. So, guys, if you are interested in checking out Barry, if you just go to my blog page at plantproblem.com, he's really easy to find there. You can just click on his name and it'll take you, and it'll connect you to his website, also his social media. So if you want to reach out to them, Barry, what was the name of your company again? Just that you're working with.
Electrum Partners. Electrum
Partners. Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to, in the future, if you want to talk some more about that when you guys start getting busy, I'd love to have you back on if you're.
Oh, sure. That'd be great. I'd love to.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, and I hope the listeners enjoyed it like I did. I thought it was great, and keep on moving down the field. We need guys like you that are pushing forward, and I appreciate the prosecutor's vision from this side of behind the curtain. It's been great having you on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Yep.
You've just listened to another insightful episode of Plant Problems. If you like what you heard so far, don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues. For additional resources or to leave a review, head over to plantproblem.com. Join us again next week on Plant Problems with Tony Frischknecht. We look forward to having conversations with you as we go along this journey.